The year is 2025, and the checkered flag has fallen on the final NASCAR Cup Series event. Nearly 80 years of history, races, fights, and all of that has reached its last chapter. Scholars of the future will forever study the downfall of the once great giant, trying to uncover what it was that ended such a beast of sports. What will they say? What killed NASCAR? In some ways, that's not an easy question to answer, but in others, it seems obvious. How can something that appeared as a titan in the late 90s be gone in less than 3 decades? This question is so detailed that I've actually had to write out a script for this video. Numerous clashing and coercing events and decisions in only the last 15 years can explain away why NASCAR dies in the year 2025. You don't believe me? You don't see this as realistic? Well, let me explain how we got here. The 90s were a booming period for stock car racing. Nationwide engagement was reaching heights no one in the industry would have ever dreamed. This is where mistakes begin to be made. You see, NASCAR is a grassroots organization. It was built in grain fields in the South with nothing but a gallon of oil and a lug wrench. You look out on the track today and what do you see? The one thing you don't see is certainly the stock car part of National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. And that's not where the problem inherently lies. Progress is a beautiful thing. Look at F1 or IMSA and you'll see technological wonders. NASCAR is no different. The exploitations that these incredibly educated technologists have found with the mechanical marvels in NASCAR is a testament to science and engineering. I have no qualms with what we've created in NASCAR. It's how we've created it that's causing the dangerous shift in the industry as a whole. If you take away anything from this video, understand that the root of NASCAR's downfall comes down to the dollar signs. Before NASCAR's booming 90s, sponsorship was little more than a nice to have. Drivers who had never set foot into a race car could wander into the garage, get behind the wheel, and put up a top 10 lap even in old Cletus's farm truck. They didn't need full-time funding to jump out on the track and run competitively. Now, that's not saying that having no sponsorship was ideal. Obviously, having a source of income separate from the unknown's purse winnings present is without a doubt a better position to be in. You definitely weren't going to win a championship without some sort of financial backing. The difference between then and today is back then, if you came into the sport without sponsor dollars behind you, they'd line up outside your door if you became successful. Today, not even the sport's most successful active driver can give his career-long sponsor a return on investment. Jimmy Johnson is a threat to win every week. Well, maybe not this year, but the point is, he is someone that the cameras will be on every single week. If even he can't give sponsors a return on investment, nobody can. So back in the 70s, any wahoo could get a nationally known sponsor, but now, even the sport's arguably most prominent figure can't hold on to his. How did this become a problem? The simple answer can be found in the cars themselves. How do you think they became the technological marvels that they are? Somebody had to pay for it, and that responsibility fell on the sponsors. There's nothing wrong with using your sponsorship dollars to make your cars better. Hell, that's why the sponsors are there in the first place. Where the issue lies goes back to NASCAR's boom in the 90s, where companies and businesses and multinational corporations were practically throwing themselves at drivers and teams, trying to outbid each other to get placed onto these cars. Take a look at some of these cars from the 90s and tell me what jumps out at you. Now look at them side by side with a car from 2018. Would you believe if these cars raced in the same race in 1998 and that the one on the right cost more to sponsor? No chance. Back in the 90s, sponsors would pay ridiculous amounts just to get one of these small stickers onto the side of a car. It's that ridiculous amount of money that funded what you see on track today. Without this influx of money from the 90s, the current aerodynamic technological state of cup cars would probably be what we found in around 2002 or 2003. Once again, I'm not knocking teams for creating what we see on track today. What killed NASCAR is the unsustainable business model that these cars were created under. What killed NASCAR is the snowball effect multi-million-dollar sponsorships had on car development. Teams can't afford to fall back on car development. If you need proof of that, look no further than Roush Fenway. In 2005, Roush put all 5 of their cars into the chase, which was only the top 10 in points back then. Only 10 years later in 2015, all 3 of their full-time drivers finished either 20th or worse in points. This downfall should have been obvious from the start. Roush has always struggled with sponsorship even back during the sport's boom. Jeff Burton was let go from the team in 2004 for just that, no sponsors. With no income to build their team, it should be no wonder how they fell from grace in only 10 years. Clearly, sponsor dollars are needed to build a successful team, and Jack Roush fell to incredible lows when he lost those sponsor dollars. And don't think other teams didn't notice this downfall too. If you want proof of that, look no further than Paul Menard. I don't think I really need to say anything else. If you're wondering how exactly it was that Paul Menard made it into the sport, you're either willfully ignorant or just live outside the States. Paul Menard is the son of one of the richest men on the planet, John Menard, and his national hardware store juggernaut Menards has pretty much single-handedly funded the ARCA racing series for several years now. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that John Menard's sponsorship dollars are keeping American motorsports afloat. What I'm saying is that John Menard's sponsorship dollars are what brought American motorsports into the bind it finds itself in today. Paul Menard is what the international motorsports family calls a pay driver. Because of the unsustainable business model, the influx of sponsorship dollars is thrust upon not only NASCAR but motorsports abroad. Pay drivers have become the main stars of NASCAR as a whole. John West Townley was a punchline for the greater part of 5 years in the Truck Series. If he wasn't upside down in a multi-car pileup, he was running 25th 3 laps down. Granted, he did finally win in Las Vegas in 2015, but after an entire career of wrecking race cars and costing teams millions over his career, who in their right mind was continuing to hire him to wreck their cars on a weekly basis? You probably guessed it from the common denominator in all the pictures you've seen so far. John West Townley's parents owned Zaxby's, and teams are willing and even eager to sacrifice their on-track success in favor of paid drivers funding their cars. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that all paid drivers are bad at racing. It's just that the vast majority of them are bad at racing and as a result, negatively impact the quality of the races they participate in. What, you thought I wouldn't mention the quality of races in a video titled What Killed NASCAR? The most clear and obvious problem in NASCAR is the fact that the races just aren't that good. No amount of pay driving or unsustainable business models will prevent the downfall of the sport more than boring races that turn fans away. Why are sponsors in the sport in the first place? To get eyes on their brand. If there's no eyes on the sport, there's no eyes on the sponsor's brand. There's nothing in it for the sponsors if no one watches the races, and with rapidly dwindling ratings week in and week out, it's no wonder sponsors are fleeing NASCAR faster than you can keep track. So, why are the fans leaving? There's more contributing factors than I can list in this video for that. What matters when you mull over the question what killed NASCAR is the fact that NASCAR's viewer base is either leaving in droves or dying off. Boring races and oversaturation of gimmicks have not only driven away the sport's hardcore fan base, but it also isn't appealing to the fictional group NASCAR has been trying to appeal to in the last 15 years, the casual racing fan. To understand the context of the fictional casual racing fan, we have to go back to that crucial period we keep coming back to in this video. In the 90s, NASCAR received its big influx of sponsor dollars because NASCAR had become a national sensation. The seasons were being televised in full. NASCAR was beating out other big-time professional sports in the ratings. People knew who Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon, Bill Elliott, and Rusty Wallace were. Demand for NASCAR was peaking. Sponsors took notice and threw their money at race teams. And you also have to acknowledge the fact that the CART IRL split was also a contributing factor to NASCAR's increased viewer base, where disenfranchised open-wheel fans turned to the only other major form of racing that was recognized nationally at the time. All these factors and more made NASCAR appealing to a casual audience. If you've ever been in middle school, you'll understand what happened. When you see someone else engaged in something, you become more interested. If you see your friends engaged in something, you want to be a part of it too. Fads are a part of American culture, and from the 90s until the mid-2000s, NASCAR was a fad. The fictional casual racing fan is nothing more than a result of a fad that ended 15 years ago. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if NASCAR never tried to appeal to that fictional casual racing fan. If they hadn't dropped everything and bent over backwards trying to bring back those people, NASCAR would have fallen back to ratings they found in the 80s. The fad would have ended, but the people who'd been watching NASCAR before the fad started would have still been there. Unfortunately, NASCAR didn't want the good times to end, and did everything in their power to try and bring those good times back. NASCAR's viewership is at an all-time low. The endless gimmicks have not only driven away the sport's hardcore fans, but it hasn't even done what it was created to do in the first place, and that's attract new ones. I hope you at least understand why they did what they did. From an outsider's perspective, the crass decisions NASCAR made in the late 2000s may seem like suicide. The decision NASCAR made was a dumb one, but that doesn't make it the wrong decision. If they hadn't introduced these changes, yes, more hardcore fans probably would have remained fans of NASCAR, but the booming period NASCAR had in the 90s forced their hand. Like I've said so many times already, NASCAR built an unsustainable business model. This is what killed NASCAR. A vicious cycle that fed into itself for too long and ended up eating itself alive. You see, from the outside, it doesn't make sense why NASCAR sacrificed everything to try and appeal to the fictional casual racing fan. But if you've been paying close attention to the video, you probably already understand why they did try and bend over backwards for the fictional casual racing fan. Here's why. The unsustainable business model NASCAR created in the late 90s forced them to beg and plead for the fictional casual racing fan to return after the NASCAR fad ended in the mid-2000s. Without the millions of eyes the NASCAR fad brought into the sport, sponsors were no longer seeing returns on investment. Without returns on investment, sponsors left. Without sponsors, teams had to rely on pay drivers to feed into that unsustainable business model big money brought into the sport in the 90s. With pay drivers, among several different gimmicks NASCAR introduced to try and appeal to that fictional casual racing fan, the on-track product suffered. With the gimmicks and the on-track product suffering, NASCAR's pre-boom fan base felt disenfranchised and also began to leave. With more and more fans leaving, more and more sponsors began to leave the sport. The cycle continued and continued until we got where we are now. And that's not to say that the big crash in 2008 didn't contribute to this either. Sponsors leaving the sport in droves also has something to do with that, and while that's not something that NASCAR had any control over, you still have to acknowledge it. If not even Jimmy Johnson can keep his sponsors, how can anyone else? NASCAR must either purposely regress the technological progress they've made in their cars or face the consequences. NASCAR must put the stock back in stock car. The standard Ilmore engine in trucks is a great start, and we've already seen the positive changes that's made in the truck series, but they need to go further. Teams must be able to operate at a competitive level without absurd expenses. Roger Penske went on record to say that the cost of fielding one NASCAR Cup Series car costs about the same as fielding 3 IndyCar entries. And Roger fields 3, technically 4, Cup Series cars. That is unacceptable. Spending in NASCAR is out of control and has been for the better part of 15 years. This needs to change immediately. Otherwise, we're going to wake up one day and there won't be a NASCAR. And that day is coming very soon. 2025 isn't that far away. And even then, I don't see the sport surviving past. This is my plea to NASCAR and Brian France. Stop trying to appeal to the fictional casual racing fan. Stop the bleeding. Don't let NASCAR die. Thank you for watching.